She was hiding behind a washing machine. 5 years old, knees pulled to her chest, cheeks streaked with tears already drying at the edges, and when I finally found her, she didn't reach for me. She whispered a question that I still hear some nights when the house goes quiet. "Mommy, do I have to say sorry to Aunt Lorraine?" I want you to sit with that for 1 second, the way I had to sit with it on that cold laundry room floor, because my daughter, my sweet, gentle 5-year-old, believed she was the one who owed an apology. By the end of that afternoon, a single photograph would unravel a lie my husband's family had been protecting for years. My name is Nora, and this is the day I stopped pretending my daughter was safe with people who shared her blood. 2 years before that birthday party, I lost my husband, Dashiell. A construction accident. Nothing dramatic in the telling of it. Just a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday that ended the life I thought I was going to have. One moment I was folding laundry, half watching some forgettable cooking show, and the next I was on the kitchen floor, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to a stranger explain in careful, rehearsed sentences that he wasn't coming home. Dashiell was the kind of father who got down on the floor to build block towers even when his back ached from a full day on a job site. He did a different voice for every character in every bedtime story. He let our daughter Marlo paint his fingernails glittery blue because she liked how it looked against his sun-browned hands, and he spun her in slow, dizzy circles in the backyard until she collapsed into the grass, laughing, always begging for one more time before the sun went down. When he died, Marlo was 3. Old enough to remember flashes of him, his laugh, the smell of sawdust and coffee on his jacket, but too young to understand that those flashes were all she'd ever have left. What would it do to a little girl to lose the safest man in her world before she even had the words to hold on to him? Grief does strange, quiet things to a child. In the months after Dashiell died, Marlo went silent in a way that worried her pediatrician enough to send us to a therapist. She flinched at raised voices, even ones that had nothing to do with her. In crowded rooms she gripped the hem of my shirt like it was the only fixed point in a world that had already proven it could vanish without warning. I learned to read her the way you learn to read weather before a storm, the tightening of small shoulders, a shift in her breathing, the way her eyes searched for me across a room before she'd let herself relax. My in-laws, Veris and Ambrose, never quite knew what to do with a grieving grandchild. I don't think they were bad people, not at the start. I think they were people who had never learned to sit inside someone else's pain without trying to manage it into something more convenient. They loved the idea of Marlo more comfortably than they loved the complicated, still healing child in front of them. Dashiell's younger sister, Lorraine, was worse, though it took me a long time to let myself use that word. She had no children of her own, and she treated Marlo's grief like an inconvenience, interrupting her idea of what a family photograph should look like: bright, orderly, easy. She'd snap her fingers to pull Marlo out of a quiet spell. She'd tell her to use her big girl voice in a tone that carried more irritation than patience. And more than once, I noticed her gripping my daughter's wrist just a little too hard while steering her from one room to the next. Every single time, I told myself I was reading too much into it. I wanted so badly for Marlo to have family beyond just the two of us that I kept negotiating with my own instincts. That negotiation is the lie I told myself for 2 years, and it very nearly cost me everything. There was a Thanksgiving, about a year after Dashiell died, when Marlo spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth, and Lorraine yanked her out of her chair so fast that one small shoe skidded under the table. I stood up so quickly my own chair scraped against the floor, and Lorraine turned to me with wide, wounded eyes and said she was just trying to stop it from getting worse, as if the mess on the tablecloth were the emergency, and not the tears streaming down my daughter's face. I let it go that night too. I told myself grief made everyone rough around the edges, that Lorraine simply didn't know how to be gentle with a child who wasn't hers. I had no idea, sitting at that table, how much closer we already were to the edge of something I couldn't take back. The party that changed everything was for my niece Unia's 6th birthday, held at Veris and Ambrose's wide colonial outside Nashville, the kind of house with a wraparound porch and a backyard strung with pink balloons and a rented bounce house that had taken up 3 separate group texts the week before. It was late spring, warm enough that the lemonade sweated through its paper cups within minutes. Marlo had been quiet in the car on the way over, tracing shapes on the window glass the way she always did before these gatherings. We had a signal by then, one her therapist helped us build, If things got too loud, too much, she'd squeeze my hand twice, no explanation needed, and we'd slip away together until she felt steady again. For the first hour, things seemed almost fine. She stayed close to my side, nibbling a cupcake, watching the other children bounce in the inflatable castle with a kind of cautious longing that always ached in my chest a little. I noticed Lorraine watching her once from across the yard, her mouth pressed into a thin line, and I told myself it was nothing. I got pulled into a conversation about a kitchen renovation, the kind of small talk that eats 20 minutes without you noticing the time slipping away. And when I turned back around, the spot beside me was empty. I didn't panic right away. Children wander at parties, that's simply what they do. I checked the dessert table, then the side yard where a cluster of older kids played some chaotic version of tag, then the kitchen, where Veris stood arranging deviled eggs with the focused precision of someone assembling a museum display, barely glancing up when I asked if she'd seen Marlo. She was right here a minute ago, Veris said, waving vaguely toward the living room, already turning back to her eggs, as though the question itself were a small imposition on her afternoon. By the 8-minute mark, my chest had gone tight in a way I recognized from every worst moment of the past 2 years. I checked the guest bedroom with its neatly folded quilts. I checked the front porch, half expecting to find her sitting on the steps the way she sometimes did when things became too much. And then, passing the laundry room, I heard it, a small, broken sound, half swallowed, like someone trying very hard not to be heard at all. What I found on the other side of that door would end up on a witness stand months later, but in that moment, all I felt was the floor tilting beneath me. Marlo was wedged between the washing machine and a fallen laundry basket, knees to her chest, a red mark blooming high across her left cheek. When she looked up at me, her eyes were too wide, too weary for a 5-year-old at her cousin's birthday party. I dropped to my knees so fast I felt the tile bruise straight through my jeans. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice shaking despite every effort to keep it steady, "who did this to you?" Her lower lip trembled, her hands twisted into the fabric of her dress, and then came the 6 words that split something open in me that has never fully closed. "Please don't be mad, Mommy." My daughter thought she was the one who needed to apologize for someone else putting their hands on her. When I reached to gather her into my arms, she flinched, just for a fraction of a second. But I felt it land somewhere deep, and I understood in that instant that the flinch wasn't really about me at all. It was about what she had just learned hands could do, and her small body hadn't relearned yet which ones were safe. What kind of person, I remember thinking as I carried her out of that room, does something to a grieving child and then simply goes back to arranging deviled eggs? I carried Marlo out into the backyard, and the party went quiet in pieces, the way a radio signal drops out section by section. The woman near the cooler froze mid-sentence. Roland lowered his paper plate without seeming to notice. The children near the bounce house slowed their play, sensing before they understood that something had shifted in the grown-up world around them. Lorraine stood near the cake table, a tight smile already forming, the particular smile of someone who knows a question is coming and has already decided how she's going to answer it. Veris appeared in the sliding glass doorway, a stack of napkins pressed to her chest like a shield. Ambrose stood by the grill, beer bottle loose in one hand, his jaw already set in a way that told me exactly whose side he'd chosen before a single word was spoken. "Who did this to my daughter?" I said, and it wasn't a question, not the way I said it. Nobody answered. The whole yard seemed to hold its breath. A balloon scraped against the fence in the light breeze, and somewhere near the drink table, a phone kept playing a bright, oblivious cartoon jingle, absurd against the sudden silence. And still, nobody said a word. Lorraine finally sighed, the exact sigh of someone mildly inconvenienced by an overreacting relative. "Don't turn this into something it wasn't," she said. She had a meltdown, bumped into the cupcake table, and started wailing like the world was ending. I brought her inside so she'd calm down before she ruined Junior's cake photos. That's all that happened. Marlo pressed harder into my shoulder, her small hand fisting into the back of my shirt. Veris rushed over next, her voice dropping into that register mothers use when they want to scold you without anyone else quite hearing. "This is not the time or place, Nora, we have guests." Ambrose stepped in behind her. "Kids fall, Nora. Kids cry. There's no need to turn a birthday party into some kind of interrogation." That word sat there in the warm spring air while Marlo's fingers curled tighter into my shirt, and I thought about every single time over 2 years I had swallowed my own instincts to avoid exactly this moment. Then Lorraine crossed her arms and said the line that would replay in my head for weeks afterward, long after the bruise on Marlowe's cheek had faded. You only cuddle her this much because you still feel guilty about Dashiell. The backyard went utterly silent, and something white-hot rose through my chest, a fury so complete I had to consciously loosen my grip on my daughter so I wouldn't accidentally hold her too tight. I didn't say another word to any of them. "We're leaving," I said, and walked for the gate. What none of them knew yet, as I carried my daughter out that driveway, was that somewhere in a phone tucked into someone else's pocket, the truth had already been captured, and it was already on its way to me. In the car, my hands wouldn't quite stop shaking as I buckled Marlowe into her booster seat. "Is Aunt Lorraine going to be mad at me?" she whispered as I pulled out of the driveway. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles went pale. "No, baby, not ever," I told her. "You never have to apologize for someone else hurting you." I drove straight toward urgent care, my mind already cataloging everything that needed to happen next. Photograph the mark before it faded, get it documented, figure out what came after. At a red light 3 minutes from the clinic, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Roland, Unia's father, no message attached, just a photograph. I almost waited until I parked to open it. I didn't wait. And the moment I zoomed in, my stomach dropped straight through the floor of the car. It was a photo someone had taken of the cake table, clearly meant to catch Unia mid-laugh before blowing out her candles. But in the far corner of the frame, slightly out of focus, was Lorraine. One hand gripping Marlowe's upper arm, the other raised and caught mid-motion, Marlowe's face twisted away in the unmistakable posture of a child trying to shrink out of reach of something she couldn't escape. A second text followed almost immediately. "Nora, I'm so sorry. I didn't notice this until I looked back through my camera roll just now." Lorraine's story had just died in a single frame of accidental birthday photography, and I hadn't even gotten to the part that would end it completely. At urgent care, the physician's assistant documented the soft tissue bruising carefully, a photograph added to the medical chart. No serious injury, thank God, but proof, real and undeniable, sitting in a folder that no one could talk their way around. The next morning I called a family law attorney my sister had used years earlier, and within the hour I had an appointment. I brought everything, the photograph, the medical documentation, the time-stamped text messages, unedited. My attorney reviewed it all with the calm, methodical focus of someone who had seen this pattern before, and told me plainly that the photograph alone, paired with the medical record, was enough to petition for an emergency protective order on Marlowe's behalf. I filed a police report that same morning. The officer who took my statement reviewed the photograph with a seriousness that told me he wasn't taking it lightly, though he gave nothing away about what might come next. And it was later that morning, while I was still sitting in my attorney's office, that Roland called again, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard from him before. He said he'd been up half the night, and it had occurred to him that his father-in-law had installed a security camera facing the side yard after a break-in 2 summers earlier. He'd gone back and checked it before anyone else in the house thought to. And what it showed was worse than either of us wanted it to be. It showed Lorraine pulling Marlowe by the arm toward the laundry room door, out of the party's line of sight, and then, in grainy but unmistakable footage, exactly what happened in the seconds before I found my daughter curled behind that washing machine. Roland sent me the full clip that afternoon. I watched it once, then had to set the phone down and sit on the bathroom floor for a long while before I trusted myself to watch it a second time. I forwarded it to my attorney within the hour, and to the officer right after. I want to tell you everything that followed was simple. It wasn't, but for the first time in 2 years, it was finally, undeniably clear. The protective order was granted within the week, barring Lorraine from any contact with Marlowe, supervised or otherwise, pending review. Veris called 4 times that first day. I let every call go to voicemail, and when I finally listened that night, they weren't apologies at all, they were a slow, escalating campaign dressed up as concern, warning me about what this would do to Marlowe's relationship with her grandparents going forward. What it would actually do was something I found myself confronting that same night, when I made myself watch the porch footage one final time, slower, more carefully, and caught a frame I'd nearly missed twice before. There was Veris, clearly visible at the kitchen window, watching the entire incident unfold in the side yard. She didn't move. She didn't step outside. She simply turned away after a few seconds and went back to arranging her tray of deviled eggs, as though nothing at all had happened just beyond the glass. That single frame told me everything I still needed to know about how long this had quietly been the family's unspoken agreement. Roland, to his lasting credit, didn't stay quiet either. Shaken by what the footage showed, he began asking Unia gentle questions of his own, and what she told him, in the halting way young children disclose difficult things, was that Lorraine had grabbed her too, more than once, whenever she hadn't moved fast enough to suit her. Unia, only 6 years old, had already learned to keep her voice bright and her compliance quick, because she'd figured out on her own what happened when she didn't. Roland filed his own report that week and cut Lorraine off entirely from unsupervised time with his daughter, a decision that cost him his easy standing in the family, one he never once regretted. A few cousins reached out privately in the weeks that followed to say they'd believed every word, that they'd had their own uneasy moments around Lorraine over the years they'd never said out loud. One of them, an older cousin named Georgiana, finally told me over coffee that her youngest son had come home from a holiday visit years earlier with a similar mark, and that when she'd raised it gently, Veris had told her she was too soft with her kids. She'd simply stopped attending gatherings rather than fight a battle she didn't think she could win alone. Hearing her say it out loud, years too late for either of us, was its own strange kind of grief. The realization that if any of us had spoken sooner, Marlo might never have been left alone in that laundry room at all. At the hearing a few weeks later, Lorraine's attorney tried to frame the whole incident as a single overreaction from a grieving mother who hadn't yet processed her husband's death, the same insinuation Lorraine had made in that backyard, dressed now in a suit instead of a tight, practiced smile. It didn't hold up once the judge reviewed the time-stamped video alongside the urgent care photographs. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a room when evidence simply speaks for itself, and I watched Lorraine's composure slip for the first time since I'd known her. Veris and Ambrose lost their unsupervised access to Marlo entirely, supervised visits only, contingent on a written acknowledgement of what the footage actually showed. Neither of them has ever agreed to sign it. To this day, they haven't seen Marlo outside of a courthouse hallway, and I've made my peace with the fact that they may never choose to. It's been 8 months now since that birthday party. Marlo still flinches sometimes at sudden, sharp movements, and she still needs her 2-squeeze signal at loud gatherings, a habit her therapist says may stay with her for a long while yet, if not forever. And that's all right. Healing was never going to look like a straight line, and I've stopped waiting for the day it simply disappears. But she's laughing again lately, a real, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard since before Dashiell died. 2 weekends ago we hosted a small gathering of our own at my sister's place, just the people who had actually stood by us when it mattered, Roland and Unia included, closer to us now than the family we lost that spring afternoon. No bounce house, no rented decorations, nothing performative at all. Just a grill in the backyard, a few lawn chairs, and children running barefoot through sprinkler spray until the sun went down. At one point, Marlo ran past me, soaking wet, laughing so hard she could barely catch her breath, and grabbed my hand. One squeeze. Just one. The kind that means everything is fine, before she ran straight back into the water. I think about that laundry room often, more than I probably should. I think about how close I came, over 2 quiet years of small excuses, to convincing myself that I had imagined the danger just to keep a fragile piece intact. I hadn't imagined a single bit of it. Blood gave them access to my daughter. It never earned them the right to keep her. And if you had been standing in that backyard, and every single adult around you had gone silent instead of answering, what would it have taken for you to be the one who finally spoke up?